Undercover boss Big Shaq walked into his own dealership to buy a truck. No one knew who just stepped in. But when the customer behind him spoke, everything stopped. A buried past surfaced. A voice he never forgot echoed through the room. This wasn't just a sale. This was the moment silence met justice. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Shaquille O'Neal stepped out of the black SUV, with the ease of a man used to commanding rooms. But today he wore a plain brown hoodie, dark jeans, and a trucker cap pulled low over his eyes. No entourage, no fanfare, not even a hint of the towering fame that made him a household name. He looked like just another man stepping into the southern heat with a purpose, and that's exactly how he needed it. Here in Coldwater, Georgia, population just under 20,000, no one expected to see a billionaire walking into a truck dealership alone, and no one was going to recognize him if he didn't want to be seen. Shaq's shoulders carried more than his size today. The dealership was his. Technically, legally, financially. He had invested in a nationwide chain 5 years ago, and Coldwater Motors was one of the properties that had slid under the radar. Reports had reached his desk, subtle, unspoken red flags. A pattern in customer reviews. A soft warning from a legal team. Not an equal experience for everyone, they had said, but those were words typed on reports by men in suits. Shaq wanted to see it with his own eyes. He needed to feel it with the weight he had carried since he was 12, since the day a security guard made his mother cry outside a grocery store just a few miles from here. As he crossed the parking lot, his eyes scanned the lot. New trucks lined up with glossy pride, a few sedans out front, and 3 salespeople lounging by the glass doors. One of them, a man with sandy hair and mirrored sunglasses, nudged another with a sharp elbow and a smirk. Shaq saw it. He was used to people noticing his size, but this wasn't awe, this was calculation, judging. The look said, "Can he afford it?" before a word had even been spoken. Inside, the air conditioning hummed low, and the showroom gleamed like every other corporate dealership in America. Bright lighting, coffee bar untouched, and soft jazz playing from a ceiling speaker. Shaq moved slowly, pretending to browse, his eyes alert. The first employee approached, a tall, slender woman with a tight smile and eyes that skimmed his shoes before meeting his face. "Help you with something, sir?" He nodded, dropped his voice to a soft baritone. "Just lookin', maybe interested in a truck." She didn't ask what kind, didn't offer a brochure. Her smile dimmed a fraction. "All right, let me know if you need help." And just like that, she turned and walked back toward her desk. 2 minutes later, a man in khakis and a blue golf shirt walked in. White, balding, grinning. He hadn't even made it 3 steps through the door before 2 employees practically raced to greet him. Hands outstretched, voices warm. "How can we help you today? Looking for a new ride?" Shaq watched. No clipboard, no assumptions. He turned toward the coffee bar, took a cup, but didn't drink it. He stood there, invisible in plain sight, just like he had hoped, and it burned. He moved toward the trucks. A silver F-150 caught his eye. As he approached, he passed a dark-skinned teenager with twisted locks wearing a hoodie. The kid was walking alone, quiet, head down, yet a security guard was trailing him like a shadow. Shaq's jaw clenched. The kid hadn't said a word, hadn't touched anything, but already suspicion had been assigned to him like a birthmark. Shaq kept his face neutral. He stood beside the truck and leaned in through the window. A smell of new leather hit his nose. He imagined his younger self dreaming of this kind of life. A life where you could walk in and be seen without judgment. A life where your money didn't need to speak for your worth. From the corner of his eye, he saw a desk manager. Name tag said Clay, watching him with mild disinterest. Clay didn't get up. Instead, he whispered something to the woman from earlier, who shrugged. Shaq walked to the next row of vehicles. Let time pass. Still, no one approached. After 20 minutes, the message was clear. He wasn't a priority. Not worth their time. His hoodie, his skin, his silence. It placed him in a bracket they didn't respect. He finally stepped toward the counter, where a receptionist, young, red curls, chewing gum with lazy rhythm, barely looked up. "I'm looking to maybe purchase a truck today," he said evenly. She blinked. "Ah, yeah? I'll see if someone's free." He waited. No one came. And in that long moment of silence, Shaq didn't feel like a businessman. He felt like a 12-year-old boy again. holding his mother's hand on a sweltering sidewalk while a white officer asked her if she even had a job, before handing back her ID. That memory never left him. Not when he dunked on championship courts. Not when he sat across from CEOs. Not when he built scholarships in neighborhoods like this one. He left the counter and walked outside, heart pounding, not with rage but with something colder: confirmation. They hadn't seen him. Not really. And they didn't care to. Back in the lot, a blue truck gleamed in the sunlight. He looked at it and whispered, "That one." He didn't say it to anyone, just himself. He walked back inside, steeled now. The plan wasn't just to observe anymore. He was going to make a purchase. He was going to stand in line like anyone else. He was going to test their limits, not as a boss, as a man who knew exactly what kind of world this was. What he didn't know yet was who he'd meet standing behind him when he finally did. And that voice, the one he hadn't heard in 30 years, would turn everything on its head. Shaq lingered by the silver truck longer than necessary. Not because he was still interested in its specs. He already knew them front to back. But because he was watching how people moved. How they smiled only with their mouths. How their greetings had different flavors, depending on the shade of the person they were directed toward. It was the kind of thing that didn't show up in a lawsuit or a policy review. It was lived experience, subtle, designed to be deniable, but unmistakable. A white couple walked in, well-dressed, loud, comfortable. Instantly, the energy shifted. The same woman who'd barely acknowledged him earlier now crossed the room with bright eyes and an open hand. "Welcome in, y'all," she chirped, her southern accent suddenly more syrupy. "We got some great deals today. Let me show you our premium inventory. No clipboard, no hesitation, just eat." Shaq turned back toward the showroom counter, letting his eyes drift across the staff. Most of them were young, white, well-groomed in that corporate neutral way. Khakis, polos, Bluetooth earbuds. But then his gaze caught someone seated behind a desktop near the front entrance. A man with a shaved head, coffee-colored skin, and a thick goatee. He was sorting through a pile of lease contracts. His expression hardened in that quiet way black men often wore when working in rooms that didn't want them loud. For a beat, Shaq stared. The man looked familiar. Too familiar. "Dre," he whispered under his breath. It hit him like a breeze carrying an old song. Andre Rivers. Childhood friend from a rough block in Newark. They'd hooped together through high school, both trying to outrun the odds. Dre had the handles, the vision, but not the height. While Shaq had soared, Dre had stayed. The last time they spoke, Dre was working 2 jobs, trying to keep his cousin out of the system. Shaq had lost touch. Now he was here, dressed in a Coldwater Motors polo. Head down, eyes tired. Shaq didn't approach, didn't call out. Not yet. Dre didn't notice him. Or maybe he did and chose not to look twice. Either way, the past hovered in the air, a familiar face faded by time, now part of a system that seemed to grind people down from the inside. Shaq watched as Dre spoke to a customer. Calm, polite, but there was a sharpness in his tone, controlled exhaustion. The customer, an older white woman, cut him off twice, demanded answers he was already giving, and looked over her shoulder like she didn't fully trust him. Dre didn't flinch, he just nodded and kept speaking. But his knuckles pressed hard against the edge of the counter. Shaq recognized that tension. He'd lived it. That thin line between professionalism and pride, the kind that left your jaw sore by sundown from holding back. As Shaq turned to walk toward the back of the showroom, he passed a series of glass offices. Behind one, 2 managers were talking. Their voices weren't loud, but the cracked door gave him a sliver of their conversation. "We don't need another diversity complaint. Just smile and get them off the lot," one said. "They don't even read the terms. Just want handouts," the other replied, chuckling. Shaq's spine stiffened. He kept walking. Every inch of the dealership had a pulse, and it wasn't right. It was the kind of place where things were said just out of earshot, where bias wore a name tag and a company smile. He made his way to the service area. There, a young black man in overalls was refilling oil cans, earbuds in, rhythm tapping against his leg. He worked with a kind of discipline Shaq respected. No wasted movements. Eyes focused, a manager brushed past him without a word. No nod, no acknowledgement, like he was part of the machinery. Back inside, Shaq returned to the truck display and pretended to compare models. A white man, late 30s, stubble, cargo shorts, stepped up beside him. "Nice ride, huh?" the man said casually. Shaq nodded. "Gotta admit," the man continued, "didn't expect someone like you to be eyeing this trim level." Shaq looked at him, measuring the tone. Not overt, but loaded. "Someone like me," he said, keeping his voice neutral. The man grinned, shrugged. "You know, these run steep." Shaq didn't respond. The man wandered off, whistling. There it was again. That coded language, that dance around the thing they didn't want to say directly. Shaq had seen it in boardrooms, airports, even five-star hotels. But here, in a place with his name buried in ownership contracts, it hit harder. This wasn't just injustice, it was personal. He turned toward the front again and saw Dre once more, now talking with a younger employee. Their body language was quiet, tight. The younger guy rolled his eyes. Dre said something short. The kid walked away, smirking. Dre glanced around the room, and for a split second, their eyes met. Something flickered. Recognition. Shaq quickly looked down, adjusted his cap, moved behind a display rack. He wasn't ready to be recognized. Not yet. This visit wasn't about reunions. It was about reality, about understanding how deep the rot went, and who, if anyone, was still trying to push back against it. As he leaned on the glass counter near the finance desk, he felt the weight of the place settle into his chest. It wasn't just about customer treatment. It was about culture. About systems built quietly, reinforced daily, never questioned because the injustice was too polite to be punished. A white man with a clipboard walked past him and handed a set of keys to another customer, nodding enthusiastically. "You're gonna love this baby. We threw in the tow package. No extra charge." Shaq's purchase, he knew, wouldn't come with such generosity. But he wasn't there for favors. He was there for truth. He took a breath, turned back toward the counter, and signaled that he was ready to make a deal. It was time to move forward. Time to trigger the next phase of his plan. He didn't notice the door opening behind him. And he didn't yet recognize the voice about to echo from the past. A voice that hadn't aged kindly. A voice that still carried the stench of power abused. But he was about to. Shaq stepped up to the sales desk with the calm confidence of a man used to negotiating high stakes. Not championship contracts, not broadcasting deals, but something more subtle: respect. He didn't need a deal today. He needed the truth to finish unfolding in real time, not on paper. This next moment was about pressure testing the surface and seeing how fast it cracked. "I'd like to talk numbers on that silver F50, he said flatly. The receptionist blinked, barely glancing up from her phone. "You mean the XL or the Lariat?" "Lariat." Extended cab. "All right, hang tight." She didn't ask his name, didn't offer a form, just turned and disappeared behind a divider wall. He stood there unmoving. Part of him wanted to storm back, point to the ownership paperwork, and demand decency. But he didn't. That wasn't the mission. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement near the side entrance. A lanky teenage boy, couldn't have been more than 16, walked in wearing a faded windbreaker and jeans. His sneakers were scuffed, mismatched laces tied loose. He had a hesitant gait, shoulders pulled in, as if to make himself smaller, eyes darting toward the nearest vehicle. A security guard, the same one Shaq had seen trailing the kid earlier, appeared almost instantly from the hallway near the service bay. Shaq's posture stiffened. The boy wasn't bothering anyone, wasn't loud, wasn't wandering. He moved toward a mid-tier SUV, his hand gently brushing the chrome door handle before pulling back, as if scared to leave a fingerprint. The guard kept 3 paces behind, arms crossed, watching, waiting, judging. Shaq turned slightly to observe without drawing attention. The kid approached another vehicle, this one a navy blue Dodge, with a sunroof. He leaned in to peek at the interior through the tinted glass. The guard stepped closer, still silent, still following. Shaq's gut twisted. He remembered being that kid. Not just big, but black in spaces that whispered you didn't belong. He remembered stores where the silence was heavy with suspicion. Elevators that seemed to tighten when he stepped in. The unspoken message: "We see you, but not the way you want to be seen." The receptionist returned with a clipboard, handed it to a man in a dark polo shirt with gel-slicked hair and a toothpick in his mouth. The man looked up, scanned Shaq's clothes, and smirked. "You looking to finance or paying cash?" he asked without introducing himself. "Cash," Shaq replied simply. The man's smirk widened, not kindly. "That right?" Shaq met his gaze without blinking. Got some ID? Shaq nodded, reached into his wallet, and handed over a driver's license. A real one, but from a state where he wasn't instantly recognizable. It was all part of the prep. The name was his, but not that name. The salesman looked it over. Okay, Devon, he said, stressing the name like it amused him. Let's go see what we can do. They walked toward a small cubicle. Shaq passed the kid again, who now stood frozen near a black truck, eyes lowered as the security guard whispered something sharp and inaudible. The boy nodded, shrunk a little more, then turned toward the exit. Shaq slowed for a beat, then followed the salesman into the cubicle, fighting the sting behind his eyes. Inside, the man began his practiced pitch, pointing to fees, upcharges, extended warranties. He didn't offer a discount. He didn't smile. He didn't ask a single question about what Shaq needed. He just assumed what the numbers should look like. Inflated, rigid, insulting. Shaq let him finish. When he slid the paperwork across the table, Shaq leaned back. Anything else you forgot to add? He asked quietly. The man shrugged. That's standard for your type of purchase. Shaq let that phrase hang in the air. Your type. Another coded sentence. Another scar placed carefully where it could be denied later. He didn't answer. Just looked past the man, toward the glass showroom windows, searching for the boy. Gone. Shaq stood. I'll think about it. The salesman frowned, caught off guard. Did I miss something? No, Shaq said. You hit every note exactly how I expected. He turned and walked out of the cubicle, moving quickly toward the exit. Outside, the parking lot shimmered in the heat. The kid was leaning against a brick wall beside the dumpster enclosure, head down, earbuds in, but no music playing. Just silent. Shaq walked over slowly. The boy looked up, startled. For a second, fear flashed in his eyes. The same reflex so many carried when they'd been taught to expect trouble. But Shaq raised his hand gently. I saw what happened in there, he said, voice low. You all right? The boy hesitated, then gave a short nod. Just lookin'. I wasn't gonna steal nothin'. I know. The boy looked away, embarrassed. I like trucks. Thought maybe one day. Shaq's heart twisted again. What's your name? Zion. Shaq didn't respond right away. Just took the name in. Remembered it. You keep showing up, Zion, he said. You belong wherever your feet take you. Zion nodded, unsure what to say. Then he slipped his earbuds back in and walked away down the sidewalk, a sliver of hope trailing behind him like a shadow too thin to grasp. Shaq stood there for a moment longer, watching. Then he turned back toward the building, the air colder now despite the sun. Back inside, the manager with the toothpick was leaning on the counter, whispering something to another staffer, while looking Shaq's way. They both laughed. Shaq didn't flinch. He just walked back to the truck and placed his hand on the hood. This place had lost its way. And he was going to bring it back to reckoning. Not with rage, not with headlines, but with exposure. But first he needed to hear one more voice. He was walking toward the payment counter when it happened. A door creaked behind him, and a gravel-coated voice called out to the cashier, loud, entitled, sharp as broken glass. It said one word, Darlin. Shaq froze. His breath caught in his chest. He knew that voice. Had heard it through a cracked window, 30 years ago, on a roadside in August heat, while his mother cried behind a steering wheel. His hands curled into fists, and he didn't even turn yet. Because some names, some sounds, take longer to face than others. But the next move was coming. And everything, every moment so far had just been the prelude. Shaq didn't turn around right away. That voice, the one that called out Darlin, was still echoing in his ears, like a warped radio signal from the past. But instead of facing it head-on, he let it simmer in the background, tucked away for now. He wasn't ready to confront that ghost. Not yet. Something else had just caught his attention. Something tangible, measurable, undeniable. Two customers had entered the showroom almost at the same time. A white man in his late 40s with a Harley-Davidson t-shirt, clean-shaven, and a booming voice that announced his presence like a small-town mayor. And behind him, a younger black man in work boots and a reflective vest, clearly just off shift, holding a folded pay stub in one hand and car keys in the other. Their paths didn't cross, but their intentions matched. Both had their eyes set on the same truck model, a red F-150 Lariat, parked just inside the display bay. The white man was greeted instantly by two salespeople, no less. Laughter, handshakes, small talk. Within minutes, he was being offered coffee, ushered toward the cubicles. Shaq, now seated inconspicuously nearby with a service brochure in hand, listened carefully. "No money down, we can work with that," the salesman chuckled. "We're running a few sweetheart deals today. And hey, for you, I'll throw in a tow package. Can't let you leave here without it." "Appreciate it," the man said, grinning as he leaned back, arms crossed like a king among peasants. Just 10 feet away, the younger black man was standing quietly at another desk, waiting. No one rushed over. After a minute, he cleared his throat and waved at the nearest associate. "Yeah, you need something?" the man asked, not looking up from his screen. "Just wanted to see the numbers on that red truck. Got my check stub here, if you need income proof." Now the associate looked up. His eyes scanned the man. His vest, his boots. "You got a cosigner?" The customer blinked, confused. "No, I got the down payment." "Yeah, but we'd need to run credit first. Might be tough without a cosigner. These trucks aren't cheap. I've been saving for 2 years." The associate shrugged, unconvinced. "I can run it, but I'm just telling you how it usually plays out." Shaq's fingers curled around the edge of the brochure. The difference in tone was ice cold. One man was assumed qualified before a question was asked. The other was being talked down to, prejudged, pre-rejected. The white customer laughed loudly across the room. "My credit's trash, man," he joked. "Wife's name gonna be on the papers anyway." The salesman laughed with him. "Ain't no thing. We'll work the numbers." Shaq leaned forward slightly. Then, with practiced subtlety, he reached into his pocket and turned on his phone's voice memo recorder. He didn't point it at anyone. Didn't need to. The words, the tone, the implications, they were enough. The black customer stood his ground, pushing back gently. "You haven't even looked at my numbers yet. Like I said, I'll run it. Just letting you know it probably won't come through." Shaq stood, slowly, and moved toward the corner of the showroom, where a few stacked brochures created a semi-private space. From there, he took out a notepad from his coat pocket and scribbled a few lines. Time, names on tags, vehicle info. He wasn't just documenting it for himself, he was building something. Quietly, methodically, a case. That's when he made the call. He stepped outside, leaned against the wall near the service bay, and dialed a number he'd memorized for years. A legal contact in Atlanta, someone who specialized in corporate accountability, someone who had once represented a teacher fired for calling out racial bias in a public school district. "It's me," he said when the line picked up. "Name stays off everything for now, but I need eyes on a dealership. Coldwater Motors. Start pulling public reviews, internal complaints if you can find any. I'll send audio. This isn't a one-off. It's a pattern." There was no reply for a second. Then, just a low, "Got it." Shaq hung up and walked back inside. The white man was now shaking hands with the salesman. "I'll be back tomorrow to sign. Just gotta move some things around in the account. You'll hold it for me?" "Of course, man. I got you. You're good for it." Meanwhile, the black man was walking out, head down, empty-handed. He didn't look angry, just defeated, like he'd expected it but hoped this time might be different. Shaq held the door open for him without saying a word. The man nodded once in thanks, not recognizing him. As he watched him disappear into the parking lot, Shaq knew the story was growing teeth. This wasn't about one bad salesman. It wasn't even about one bad dealership. It was a cultural fracture baked into the system, camouflaged under customer service scripts and vague financial lingo. He was seeing it now. Every coded line, every subtle gatekeeping move. And that voice from earlier, the one that stopped him cold, was still inside. That customer hadn't left. Shaq took a long breath and stepped back into the showroom. Next, he would face the ghost he wasn't ready for. And this time, it wouldn't be from behind a microphone or in front of a camera. It would be one man staring down the past while carrying a future too big to stay quiet any longer. Shaq stood at the payment counter, shoulders squared, the truck paperwork just moments from being finalized. The salesman who had earlier doubted his ability to pay was now all too eager, punching numbers into the screen, talking interest rates and tag fees in a forced friendly tone. Shaq let the man rattle on without reacting. He wasn't here for the truck anymore. That part was just camouflage. The real reason he stood rooted to that spot had everything to do with what he'd heard earlier. That voice. The one that sliced through time like a jagged knife. "Darlin', let me get a manager out here. Ain't got all damn day." The tone was unmistakable. Southern, gravel thick, confident in its own authority. But it was more than just the sound. It was the inflection, the way it curled with casual cruelty, like it had spent a lifetime enjoying power without ever being questioned. Shaq knew that voice better than he wanted to. He hadn't heard it in over 3 decades, but its imprint had never faded. The salesman looked past Shaq, a flicker of annoyance on his face, then nodded toward the back. "Someone'll be with you in a sec, sir." Shaq didn't turn around. His body had gone still. Not frozen in fear. Something colder, deeper, recognition without contact. Like a wolf smelling the air, and knowing exactly which predator was near. He stared down at the credit agreement on the desk in front of him, but the numbers blurred. His fingers loosened around the pen. His vision tunneled. And just like that, the memory came rushing in. August. Georgia, mid-90s heat. He was 12. His mother had taken him and his baby sister into town for groceries. The old Ford sedan they drove was sputtering even then, barely holding itself together. They'd stopped at a corner gas station, with one working pump and a payphone mounted beside it. Shaq remembered the cracked pavement, the flies, the sour scent of beer drifting out from the station's door. That's when he pulled up. Sheriff Curtis Mallory. Back then, the man wore his badge like a birthright. His cruiser gleamed, windows tinted so dark you couldn't see the passenger side. But Shaq saw his boots hit the pavement when he stepped out, heard the crunch of gravel, and then the way he spoke to his mother, Lucille, like she was less than the heat on the blacktop. "You got ID, girl?" he'd asked. She had smiled, that tense smile women wear when they know they're being hunted, but can't run. "Yes, officer. Just went inside." "I didn't ask why you're here. I asked if you got ID." Shaq had been standing right there, small but already tall, fists clenched at his sides. He remembered the flare of humiliation in his chest. The way the word girl wasn't about youth. It was about stripping dignity. He remembered his mother's trembling fingers as she opened her purse, and he remembered Curtis Mallory glancing at him, then laughing. "Big ol' gorilla, huh? Hope he ain't dumb as he looks." His mother didn't say a word. She just handed over the license and waited. When Mallory finally drove away, Lucille hadn't cried, but she didn't speak for the rest of the ride home either. Shaq had never forgotten, and now, here he was, 30 years later, standing in a polished dealership with clean tile floors and top-shelf inventory. And that same voice had walked in like it owned the air. Shaq finally turned his head. Curtis Mallory was older now. Heavier. His once straight posture slightly sagged, but the arrogance was untouched. He wore a faded green button-down, tucked tight over his belly, and a trucker's cap that read, "Proud American. Try me." He didn't recognize Shaq. Of course he didn't. The boy from the gas station was now a 6'11" powerhouse with a trimmed beard and national fame, but today, dressed in modest clothes, tucked under a cap, Shaq was invisible again. Mallory stood near the entryway, tapping a cane against the tile floor, eyeing the showroom like it was a chessboard he already knew how to win. He grunted toward a passing employee, who nodded politely, and hurried off. Shaq watched, jaw tight, fingers still loose around the pen. "You all right, sir?" the salesman asked nervously. Shaq didn't answer. He took a slow breath and returned his gaze to the document. Then, in one deliberate motion, he set the pen down and folded the paperwork in half. "I'll need a minute," he said. The salesman frowned. "We were almost there." Shaq's tone left no room for negotiation. A minute. He stepped away from the desk, walked past the reception, and stopped near a display of accessories. From there, he watched Mallory interact with the staff. Nothing overt, no loud racism, but the microaggressions still bled through. Mallory spoke over a black employee mid-sentence, interrupted her, chuckled under his breath when she offered a quote. "Well, now that don't sound right," he said loud enough for others to hear. "You sure you know what you're talking about, sweetheart?" The woman smiled politely and nodded, walked away quickly. Shaq's fists clenched in his pockets. Same tone, same poison. But now the walls were corporate. The racism dressed up in pleasantries and plausible deniability. Mallory approached the same truck Shaq had picked. "What's the price on this one?" he asked. "No one in particular." The irony made Shaq exhale through his nose. Of course. Of course it would be the same vehicle. Mallory circled the truck like a man examining cattle. Tapped the door, kicked the tire, then turned toward the front counter. "If I'm buyin', I ain't fillin' out no damn forms." You want a sale or not? Shaq took a step back. His pulse had steadied now, not because he was calm, but because clarity had set in. He knew what he was dealing with. Knew who this man was. Not just the name. The type. Mallory didn't need to remember him. Shaq remembered enough for both of them. And this time he wasn't 12. He wasn't silent. And he wasn't alone. Because what was about to happen next would change everything. Not just for this dealership, but for every man like Mallory, who still thought the world hadn't moved on without them. The air in Coldwater had always carried a thickness to it. Not just from the southern heat, but from the weight of unspoken rules. Who could stand where, speak how, be seen or be dismissed. Shaq had felt it every summer growing up, each visit to his uncle's place just a few miles from this very dealership. The air didn't just press down on your skin, it pressed on your name, your skin tone, your tone of voice. And it had all started with one moment burned too deep into his memory to ever fade. He was 12 the day Sheriff Curtis Mallory stepped out of his cruiser on the side of Highway 95. Shaq had been riding in the passenger seat, feet barely touching the floorboard, his baby sister dozing in the back. Lucille O'Neill, tall, poised, worn from the week, was driving. The engine had been sputtering for 10 miles, but she was focused, determined to stretch the last gallon of gas toward the only grocery store open that late. They hadn't even broken any traffic laws. No speeding, no rolling stop. Yet the blue lights had flashed behind them like judgment from heaven. The patrol car roared up too close. Mallory didn't use his loudspeaker. He didn't flash a friendly hand. He stepped out like he owned the sun and the land under it, boots loud on the gravel shoulder. His mirrored sunglasses caught Shaq's reflection as he approached, hand already near his belt buckle. "License," Mallory had said. "Not ma'am. Not please." Just the word cold and flat. Lucille had handed it over with slow fingers, her voice soft. "Is something wrong, officer?" Mallory didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, then shifted his gaze to Shaq. "Boy, you that big and still sittin' like a baby," he'd said, chuckling at his own joke. Shaq hadn't laughed. Neither had his mother. "I asked if we did something wrong," Lucille said again, firmer. Mallory leaned his elbows on the window, the stench of chewing tobacco thick in his breath. "You talk sharp for someone whose car's coughing like a dying mule." Lucille flinched but said nothing more. Shaq could see her knuckles tighten around the steering wheel. She didn't move, didn't blink. Then came the moment, the one that etched itself into Shaq's bones. Mallory leaned back, took off his sunglasses, and let the smile fade. "You're a long way from your side of town," he said. "We keep track of whose dirt these roads belong to." He handed the license back like it was a used napkin. Lucille didn't cry. She simply rolled up the window, waited until Mallory's cruiser had pulled away, and then started the car. It stalled twice before it groaned forward. The whole ride back she kept one hand on the wheel, and the other over her chest, like she was holding something inside that might shatter if left alone too long. Shaq never asked about that moment again. He didn't have to. It shaped everything that came after. The way he walked into boardrooms, the way he gave interviews, the way he listened instead of reacted. The memory became his silent governor, the thing that told him when to lean in and when to lean out. It was what made him generous and cautious in equal measure. Now in the Coldwater Motors showroom, 30 years later, he watched the same man from that highway lean against a display truck and wave a saleswoman off like she was invisible. Curtis Mallory had aged into the kind of man who didn't know how to shrink even when the world changed around him. His authority was cracked but not broken. His tongue still sharp, still dipped in the same superiority it had always wielded. Shaq observed quietly, allowing the weight of the past to settle over the moment. He wasn't the scared boy anymore. He wasn't even the player turned star. He was the man who owned this space, and yet, the power of that old voice still stirred something primal in his blood. He stepped away from the accessory shelf and moved toward the service desk again, putting himself within earshot of Mallory's loud conversation. "I want the damn truck for under sticker, and I ain't sitting through no sales pitch," Mallory said. "I've done more for this town than half the people working here." The sales associate chuckled nervously, nodding. "We can check with the manager, sir." Shaq's eyes flicked to Dre, still seated at his post, face impassive. Dre noticed Mallory too. His jaw twitched, but he said nothing. They'd all heard this kind of customer before, some just louder than others, some walking reminders of how things used to be, and sometimes still were. Shaq moved behind a row of lease signs and closed his eyes for a second. His breathing slowed. The ache in his chest wasn't anger. It was clarity. The kind that only comes when the past walks into the present, without knocking. He had the evidence now. The audio recordings. The customer experiences. The management patterns. But this wasn't just about policy. This was personal. And yet, he couldn't confront Mallory. Not now. Not in this setting. It would be too clean. Too easy for the man to deflect. For people to say maybe he didn't mean it that way. Shaq needed this reckoning to unfold under the right light, on the right stage. So he made a decision. He wouldn't reveal himself today. Not yet. He would let Mallory walk out of here with that same arrogance. That same false sense of control. And then he'd flip the entire table. The camera crews were already on standby. The legal team briefed. The internal audits pulled. All he had to do now was step into the role he'd crafted so carefully. The silent observer turning into the storm. But before that storm hit, he had one more truth to uncover. And the next clue sat in a locked office just down the hall, buried behind years of paperwork and a manager who'd been playing both sides for far too long. Shaq made his way past the front desk and into the quieter wing of the dealership, where the floor tiles turned beige and the noise thinned to a low hum of printers and backroom phones. The offices back here weren't part of the showroom glamour. They were tucked behind frosted glass and labeled with generic plaques: finance, admin, inventory lead. But it was the door marked General Manager Clay Riddell that held his attention now. Clay was the kind of manager who wore polished loafers on a concrete floor and smiled like a man who knew which stories to tell and which ones to bury. Shaq had seen him already, working the room like a politician. Clay hadn't recognized him. Most people didn't when he dressed down, which was exactly the point. But Clay had something else. The kind of confidence that didn't come from success, but survival. He knew the system, played it, protected it. Shaq waited until Clay stepped out for a call and left his door unlocked. Timing mattered. He moved like a customer lost, looking for a restroom, then slid into the manager's office with the stealth of muscle memory, built from years of slipping past defenders on a basketball court. The office was neat, obsessively so. No personal photos, no framed diplomas, just a monitor, 2 manila folders on the desk, and a locked cabinet in the corner. He sat down in the guest chair, reached for the folders. The first one was a financial report, expected. The second was labeled internal staff turnover. That one mattered. Inside, he found a list of employees terminated over the past 18 months. It wasn't long, but the names told a story. Half were Black or Latino. A few had red flags scrawled beside them. Attitude problem. Didn't mesh with team. Repeated policy concern. But the one that stopped Shaq cold was a technician named Jamal Breyer. Terminated 8 months ago. Not for performance, not for theft. Just a single handwritten note. Pushed too hard on customer complaints, not a fix. Shaq remembered the name now. It had shown up in one of the early legal briefs his team had flagged. Breyer had tried to file a report to corporate. Twice. Both times it was redirected back to the dealership, where it vanished. He dug further. At the bottom of the folder was a printed email thread, half redacted. The subject line read, "Rye interview notes, uncomfortable remarks by sales staff." The first line hit like a gut punch. "Clay, thanks for handling this quickly. I agree that pushing back too hard on store culture isn't the best long-term fit. Let's consider rotating in someone less reactive next round." Shaq's breath slowed. The email was from a regional executive. Higher up than Clay. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly how it was designed to. He folded the papers, slipped his phone out, and began taking pictures. No flash, no sound, just silent snapshots of institutional betrayal. His fingers moved fast, but his mind was already racing. These weren't just mistakes. These were patterns, protected by hierarchy, and Clay was the enforcer on the ground. The one who smiled to customers while quietly cutting down anyone who dared to speak up. It explained the culture he'd witnessed since walking in. The coded racism, the fear in Dre's eyes, the indifference shown to the young black customer, the dismissal of Zion. All of it stemmed from a management style that didn't reward fairness. It punished awareness. Suddenly, a voice echoed down the hallway. "Where the hell's my quote? I've been standing here 20 damn minutes." It was Mallory again. Loud, entitled, barking orders like it was still his precinct. Shaq tensed. That voice was like a fuse, but it bought him a few more seconds. He snapped the final photo, returned the files exactly where they'd been, and stood. Just as he turned, Clay walked back in, phone still in hand. Shaq froze, but only for a second. Clay looked up surprised. Can I help you? Shaq didn't flinch. Restroom sign pointed back this way. Door was open. Clay's smile tightened. Right. It's actually down the other hall.
Got it. Thanks.
He walked out slowly, deliberately. Not rushed, not guilty. And once around the corner, he let out a breath through his nose. Steady, practice. Back in the main area, the noise had returned. Mallory was now leaning on the service desk, snapping his fingers at a receptionist who tried to look busy. Shaq returned to his spot near the trucks and watched Dre through the reflection in the window. The man was typing, head lowered, expression unreadable. But something flickered in his eyes when Clay passed by, something that looked a lot like fear. Shaq waited until Clay turned down the hallway again, then walked toward Dre's desk. "You've been here a while, huh?" Shaq asked casual. Dre didn't look up right away. 8 years. Ever think about leaving? Twice a week. Shaq let the silence stretch. Then carefully, he leaned in. "I saw Jamal Breyer's name in the termination files."
That made Dre stop typing.
He glanced up, eyes sharp now. "Who are you?" Shaq gave a faint smile. "Somebody who remembers Newark." Recognition hit fast. And hard. "Shaq?" Shaq nodded once. Dre's expression flickered between shock and something close to relief. Like a man who'd been carrying too much weight for too long, and just saw the cavalry coming over the ridge. "Why are you here?" Dre asked, voice low. "Same reason you stayed," Shaq said. "Because somebody needs to tell the truth." Dre looked around. "You saw what Clay's been doing. I've got proof. And more coming." Dre leaned back, exhaled. "They blackballed Jamal. He tried to fix things. Tried to report racial profiling in our leasing system. They made it look like he quit. They've done worse," Shaq said. "And I'm about to show the world." The weight in the room shifted again. Shaq's cover was hanging by a thread now. But it didn't matter. The next move wasn't about secrets anymore. It was about exposure. He had the evidence. He had the names. And now, he had Dre, the insider who could confirm every inch of the iceberg lurking beneath the showroom polish. Still, there was one more voice he needed to hear. One more truth. Locked not in a file folder, but in whispers coming from the break room. Because what he was about to learn next would blow the whole story wide open. ChatGPT said. The break room was wedged in the far corner of the service wing, past the lockers, and beneath a vent that never quite worked right. The overhead light buzzed with a tired flicker, and the vending machine displayed a perpetual out-of-order sign taped across its screen. It wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for temporary escape. 10-minute breathers, coffee breaks, and conversations best left unrecorded. Shaq entered without fanfare. His shoulders hunched just enough to blend in, hands in pockets, a paper cup in one hand. The room was nearly empty except for one man leaning against the counter, sipping from a bottle of orange Gatorade. His coveralls read jarred in stitched white thread. Grease marked his knuckles. His eyes, though tired, carried the sharpness of someone who paid attention to more than engines. Shaq gave him a nod. Jared nodded back. "Long day?" "Longer than it should be," Shaq replied. Jared smirked, a short, knowing laugh under his breath. "Ain't that the truth?" There was a silence. Not awkward, but loaded. Like two men waiting to see if the other was worth the risk. Shaq took a seat at the table. "You been here a while?" 4 years, Jared said. "Not planning on making it 5. What's stopping you?" Jared took another sip, then shrugged. "Mortgage. Baby girl with asthma. Options, I guess." Shaq waited. Let the air do its work. Jared glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You one of the buyers?" Shaq nodded. "Something like that." Jared took another long drink. "Then you already know." Shaq said nothing. Jared leaned forward. "This place is rotten, man. Not on the surface. They know how to smile right, how to talk like they care. But if you're black, brown, or just different, you don't last unless you shut up and keep your head down." Shaq kept his expression neutral. "How so?" "My little brother, Theo," Jared said. "Applied for a floor position here last year. Interview went okay. Manager told him they'd keep him in mind. 2 weeks later, they hired a white kid who didn't even have experience. That same week, Theo got pulled over right outside the dealership, said he was loitering. They cuffed him, said he matched a suspect from a theft call down the block. He'd been sitting in his car for 10 minutes. Shaq's jaw clenched.
They dropped the charges, Jared continued. But the damage was done. Local news didn't cover it. Who'd care? Another black kid mistaken for trouble. Even his interview paperwork disappeared, like he was never here.
Shaq looked up. You think that was connected? Jared scoffed. I don't think. I know. You see that old cop walking around out there earlier? The one with the cane and the loud mouth? Yeah, that's Mallory. Used to be the county sheriff. Retired 3 years back. But he still acts like he runs this place. Knows the manager. Used to sit on some kind of board, tied to the owner group. When he talks, folks jump. Especially Clay. Shaq nodded slowly, the pieces clicking together. Mallory's influence wasn't just a leftover from a different era. It was current, active, corrosive. He hadn't just returned to Coldwater Motors to stir ghosts. He'd never really left. Jared rubbed his neck, voice lower now. They treat Dre like he's lucky to be here. That man's smarter than anyone on this floor. But they keep him boxed in. When Jamal spoke up, they pushed him out. Said he was disrupting culture. Culture, Shaq echoed quietly. Yeah, that word they use when they can't say what they mean. There was a pause. Jared looked at him a little closer now. You talk different, he said. You ain't from around here, are you? No, Shaq admitted. But I know this place better than most. Jared tilted his head. You undercover. Shaq didn't answer. Didn't have to. Jared leaned back and gave a slow, impressed whistle. Well, damn. What about you? Shaq asked. Why are you telling me all this? Jared stared at the flickering light. Because I'm tired. Because my daughter's gonna grow up in this town, and I don't want her to think this is just how things are. And because, you asked, no one else ever does. Shaq reached into his jacket, pulled out a card. It didn't have his name on it. Just a number. Direct line to his legal counsel. If anything happens to you after today, call the... Jared took the card, examined it. This what I think it is. Bigger, Shaq said. Jared pocketed it without another word. The door opened behind them. A pair of mechanics stepped in, laughing over some inside joke, then stopped when they saw the room wasn't empty. Jared straightened. The conversation was over, at least in front of others. Shaq stood, nodded once, and stepped out of the break room, heart heavier than when he walked in. He had come looking for bias. He had found a machine. The dealership didn't just discriminate. It partnered with power. It recycled privilege. It silenced dissent. From the showroom to the service bay, it operated like an organism protecting its own diseased heart. But now, that heart had been exposed. And Shaq, carrying both witness and weight, was about to do what he came here for. He walked past the display trucks, past the same customers still waiting to be acknowledged, past the front desk where Dre sat, calm but alert. The final act had arrived. All that remained was to pull the curtain back and let the entire country see what Coldwater had tried so hard to hide. Shaq stood once again at the payment counter, the polished edge of the countertop cool beneath his fingertips. The paperwork was back in front of him, this time filled out completely. All the numbers lined up, all the signatures ready to be scribbled. The salesman, the same one who doubted him an hour ago, now leaned forward with polished enthusiasm, trying to read his mood. This the part where we make it official, the salesman said, sliding over the pen. Shaq didn't move. He could feel the storm building just behind him. Not in the weather, not in the crowd, but in the voice he'd grown up trying to forget. Curtis Mallory had positioned himself only a few feet behind him, speaking in the same drawl, like the air still owed him space. The former sheriff had been pacing the lot, jawing about truck specs and grumbling over sticker prices, but now he stood close, waiting to be helped, entitled to be heard. Shaq breathed slow, in and out. He was seconds from ending the charade. The disguise, the pretense, all of it had run its course. The truth was ready to be revealed. The dealership was about to learn exactly who they had ignored, patronized, and profiled. Then it happened. Mallory leaned in, not speaking to Shaq, not quite speaking to anyone, just letting his bitterness fall into the space like venom dripping from a cracked pipe. About time they let that monkey go back to the shop, Mallory muttered, referring to Jared. It was low, but loud enough. Shaq froze. The pen slipped slightly in his grip, tapping against the paper. He didn't turn, didn't speak. His mind splintered in an instant. He was 12 again, sitting beside his mother on the side of Highway 95, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. He was 16 again, walking into a gym where the coach called him a freak of nature with a laugh that wasn't friendly. He was 23, reading the newspaper call him primitive strength while ignoring his GPA. And now he was here. A grown man, a mogul, a giant in both stature and spirit. And still, the word monkey could pierce through everything he'd built and drag him back to the dirt. The room around him slowed. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Inside, he fractured. Because there are things success can't fix. There are wounds that fame can't cover. There are insults that echo louder, the more you try to silence them. He had built schools, funded communities, paid off strangers' medical bills, and still in a room full of people, in a building he owned, a man like Mallory felt safe saying that word, like it had never gone out of fashion. The salesman didn't react. Maybe he didn't hear it. Maybe he did and chose not to. Either way, the silence confirmed what Shaq had already felt in his bones. This wasn't one man's prejudice. This was the air these walls breathed. He blinked once, looked down at the form, and then he pushed it back across the counter. "No thank you," he said quietly. The salesman blinked. "Wait, we already?" Shaq stepped away, walked straight toward the front doors, heart pounding, jaw locked. Mallory's voice trailed after him. "Guess he changed his mind. Figures." Shaq didn't turn around. Not yet. The sun outside was blinding, the light sharp against the clean-cut trucks lining the lot. He walked past them all, letting his eyes adjust, letting the fury inside him cool into clarity. Not because he wasn't angry, but because the anger had matured. It wasn't a fire anymore. It was steel. He sat in his rental SUV, door closed, engine off, and for the first time in hours, he exhaled fully. The freeze had passed, but something inside had shifted. He could have snapped back, could have outed Mallory right there, could have brought the cameras in that second. But that wasn't the play. Mallory had revealed something deeper, something useful. This wasn't just about racism. It was about permission. Men like him still believed they had it, that their words didn't matter, that no one would call them out, that the world hadn't changed, or at least hadn't changed for them. Shaq pulled out his phone and opened the folder with the photos, the recordings, the notes he'd taken. It was all here now, the weight of proof, lined up and undeniable. He opened a new message, typed 3 words, "We go lay." Then he hit send. Back inside the dealership, no one noticed the moment for what it was. Not yet. But the freeze had been real, and the thaw was coming. 2 days later, Coldwater Motors looked the same on the outside. Polished glass, flagpoles fluttering under the southern sun, fresh tire displays lined in neat symmetry. But there was an edge to the air now. A crackle. The ordinary had been interrupted. Just before noon, 3 black SUVs pulled into the front lot. Not flashy, not loud, but deliberate. Inside them were camera crews from national media, civil rights observers, a local legal team, and a man whose silence had ended the moment that final slur reached his ears. Shaquille O'Neal stepped out in a tailored gray suit, no hat, no hoodie, no disguise. The time for watching was over. The story had become action. Dree was already waiting near the side entrance, his Coldwater name tag still pinned to his chest, but today it hung like a badge of war. His eyes met Shaq's, and there was something electric in the nod they exchanged. Quiet validation after years of being overlooked. The cameras weren't rolling yet. That was intentional. Inside, Clay Riddell sat in his office staring blankly at his phone. He'd gotten the call 30 minutes ago. Headquarters was monitoring the situation. Legal counsel had advised him to stay calm, to remain on site, to speak to no one until a rep arrived. But none of that mattered now. He could feel it, like a leak in a sealed room. The truth was spilling in. The showroom floor was quiet when Shaq entered. A few customers looked up, confused by the sight of a camera crew sweeping in behind a man who carried himself with unmistakable purpose. One of the sales reps recognized him first. His face blanked. "Wait, is that?" It took seconds for the realization to ripple. Murmurs followed him down the hall as he made his way toward the central aisle. Clay came out of his office just in time to see Shaq stop at the very desk where they had once offered him inflated numbers and patronizing smiles. The same counter where they had asked for his ID without offering a name. "Mr. O'Neal," Clay started, trying to paste a smile onto his face. "If we had known." "You didn't need to know," Shaq said, voice firm but composed. "You just needed to treat people right." The cameras clicked on. Reporters stepped forward, mics aimed, lenses snapping. Shaq turned toward the main entrance. The glass doors swung open again. Curtis Mallory walked in, cane tapping, eyes scanning the room like always. But something in his swagger faltered when he saw the cameras. And then he saw Shaq. At first, he didn't react. His brain didn't connect the dots. Then recognition arrived like a car crash. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. "Shaquille?" he said, the name stumbling out of his mouth like he wasn't sure if it belonged to the man in front of him. Shaq didn't smile. "I remember Highway 95, he said. "I remember the gas station. I remember what you called me." Mallory opened his mouth, then closed it. The weight of decades hit him in the face. The entire room's staff, customers, press, watched in silence. "I was 12, Shaq said. "You made my mother cry, you humiliated her, and you laughed while you did it." Mallory swallowed hard. His usual bluster had nowhere to stand. "I didn't know," he muttered. "But you did," Shaq replied. "You always knew. You just never cared who was watching." The silence held. Thick. Exposing. Then Shaq turned toward the cameras. "This dealership has operated under a culture of quiet discrimination," he said. "I witnessed it. I documented it. I've seen employees punished for speaking out, customers profiled by appearance, and management cover it all up with paperwork and charm." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "These are internal emails, staff complaints, recordings, everything that Coldwater Motors thought could stay buried." Clay took a step forward, panic flashing behind his eyes. "Let's not do this here." "This is exactly where it needs to happen," Shaq cut in. The journalists surged forward. Questions flew. "Mr. O'Neill, how long were you undercover? Were you profiling racism from the beginning? Will there be lawsuits?" Shaq held up a hand. "I didn't come here to destroy a dealership," he said. "I came to hold it accountable. Because what happens in places like this isn't isolated, it's systemic. And it's time for that to change." The lawyer beside him stepped forward now, laying out documents on a display table. "As of today, Coldwater Motors is under full ownership review. Legal proceedings will begin to investigate discriminatory practices across the region's sales chain. Employees who were wrongfully terminated will be contacted, and management will face the consequences of their decisions, not just financially, but publicly." Then he turned toward Mallory, who stood rooted like a statue being slowly eroded by time. "Do you have anything to say, Sheriff?" Mallory looked around. No lifelines. No exit. He cleared his throat, voice hoarse. "I was wrong. About a lot of things. I can't change the past. But if I c—" Shaq shook his head gently. "You had your chance. The apology's not for me." He nodded toward the staff watching from behind the counter. "It's for every person you made feel small when no cameras were around." Mallory turned, his eyes lowering. For the first time, the man looked older than his years. A deep, quiet shame blanketed the room. Shaq stepped back and motioned to Dre, who now stood beside Jared and another employee from the service bay. Together they formed a line, not as protest, but as witness. "Today," Shaq said, "we end the silence." The reporters captured every second. By sundown, the footage had gone national. News anchors framed it as undercover justice. Social feeds exploded. Messages poured in from families who'd experienced the same, from workers still afraid to speak up, from towns just like Coldwater. And in the center of it all stood Shaquille O'Neal, not as a basketball legend, not as a celebrity, but as a man who had decided to walk back into the places most people forget and drag the truth into daylight. Not for revenge, but for reckoning. 3 days after the story broke, the parking lot of Coldwater Motors looked like a different place. Not because the trucks had changed or the showroom had been repainted, but because the people inside now walked with their heads lifted, or in some cases lowered for the first time. The hierarchy that once thrived in subtlety had been dismantled in daylight, and the fallout was both swift and deliberate. Clay Riddell was gone by the morning after the broadcast. Terminated not just for what he allowed, but for what he cultivated. His office had been cleared, his name removed from the door. No official statement was given, but no one needed one. The silence said more than any press release ever could. In his place, a new sign was installed above the service desk. Lead Floor Advisor, Jared Hensley. Jared didn't ask for the promotion. He didn't lobby for it. But when the offer came directly from Shaq's legal counsel, he accepted without hesitation. Not because he needed the title, but because he understood what it meant to finally have someone on the floor who saw everything. Shaq returned that morning, not with cameras or reporters this time, but with a clipboard of names and a quiet agenda. He moved from office to office, holding one-on-one conversations with each staff member. Not as a celebrity, not even as the boss, but as a listener. He asked questions, listened to their stories, took notes, and then he implemented change. Every employee at Coldwater Motors would now undergo a mandatory 6-week anti-racism training course. Not a box-checking HR video, but an intensive human-led curriculum, developed in partnership with civil rights educators. Shaq made sure it wasn't optional. Participation would be tied to retention. Equity was no longer a suggestion, it was policy. He also implemented a new reporting structure. Anonymous, protected, directly linked to external legal teams. No more internal silencing. No more retaliation. Every voice would be heard, and every case reviewed, without bias, without exception. But the biggest changes came outside the showroom. Shaq visited the home of Jamal Breyer's mother, a quiet brick house at the edge of town. Jamal had since left the state, trying to rebuild his life elsewhere, but his termination had left a scar that never healed. Shaq stood on her porch, not as a media figure, but as a man carrying regret for not stepping in sooner. He handed her a check, a restitution fund, large enough to wipe out their debt and start a business Jamal had once dreamed about. Next, he visited Theo, Jared's younger brother, still shaken by his wrongful arrest. Theo had been keeping a low profile since the broadcast. Shaq met him on neutral ground, a local barbershop that closed early for privacy. They talked for hours about what it meant to be seen only when you're accused, about the weight of proving innocence every day. By the time they stood to leave, Theo had something he never expected, a job offer in Shaq's national nonprofit focused on racial equity in employment. But perhaps the most emotional stop was at the neighborhood where Zion, the young boy from the dealership, lived. Shaq had tracked him down through a local youth program. Zion hadn't told his mother what had happened at the dealership. He'd carried the shame in silence. When Shaq arrived, the boy stood on the porch frozen, disbelief etched into his young face. Shaq crouched to meet him eye level. "You belong in every room, Zion. Don't ever forget that." Then he handed the boy's mother a sealed envelope. Inside, a full-ride scholarship fund. Not just for college, but for the mentorship, tutoring, and transportation it would take to get there. The scholarship bore a name, the Mirror Grant, named not for Shaq but for the boy who made him remember what it felt like to be dismissed, and what it meant to rise anyway. Back at Coldwater Motors, the culture had already begun to shift. Dre, still grounded, now worked with Jared to create an employee-led diversity council. Not because it was trendy, but because it was overdue. The staff began holding Friday roundtables, open to everyone. Stories were shared, biases were called out. Accountability became a shared practice, not a fear tactic. Shaq didn't stay long. He didn't need to. His presence wasn't meant to cast a shadow, but to light a fire. Before he left, he stood at the edge of the showroom, watching the new flow of energy. Customers of all backgrounds now greeted with the same tone. Employees nodding at each other like equals. Even the music playing from the ceiling speakers had changed. Something with rhythm, soul, life. He looked at Jared, who was walking a young couple toward a display truck, explaining warranties with patience and clarity. "You're doing more than selling vehicles now," Shaq said under his breath. And then he turned, walked out, and let the door close behind him.
No applause followed.
No headlines chased him down the lot, but something deeper echoed in that silence.
Change, real change, had taken hold.
And it started with a man refusing to be invisible in a place he owned. The sun was high, and golden as the new F-150 rolled gently through the back roads of Georgia, its engine humming low and steady beneath Shaq's hands. The chrome gleamed against the soft haze of dust rising from the old pavement, and inside the cab, the air was cool, the silence intentional. He wasn't playing music. He didn't need a soundtrack. The moment spoke for itself. He didn't buy the truck to make a statement, not to flex power or wealth or ownership. He bought it because it reminded him of resilience, heavy, built to carry weight, made to keep moving even when the roads weren't smooth. And today, it had only one destination. The GPS had no trouble finding the address, though Shaq didn't need the directions. His memory could have driven the route blind. Lucille O'Neill's old home, the small one-story place with the chipped mailbox and sagging porch rail, still sat on its patch of land, tucked between two larger homes that hadn't been there when he was a boy. The siding was freshly painted now, and someone had fixed the gutter that used to clang against the wall whenever it rained. Shaq parked across the street. He didn't get out. He just sat there, one arm draped over the wheel, watching. The front yard had changed. There was a swing set now, a trampoline, a garden patch growing with wild pride, and in the middle of it all, 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, chased each other barefoot through the grass, laughter spilling through the open window. Shaq smiled, slow and quiet. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was something deeper. A kind of closure wrapped in movement. He remembered playing in that same yard, with his cousins, using bricks for bases, ducking under low branches, running like joy was the only thing that mattered. He remembered his mother's voice calling from the porch, warning them not to track mud into the house. And he remembered how tired she looked at night, how hard she worked to make sure he had clean shoes for school and something warm for dinner. This house had witnessed everything. The poverty, the sacrifice, the silence. And now, it stood for something new. Shaq leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. The last few days had been heavier than most of his professional life, and that included championship losses. But unlike those games, this one hadn't ended with stats or applause. It ended with people seeing each other, with conversations that cracked through years of denial, with a boy named Zion, who might now walk into a dealership someday and be treated like a customer, not a suspect. Justice, he'd realized, wasn't a finish line. It was a lane, one you had to keep driving, even when the signs were faded and the road signs missing. He opened his eyes again. Across the yard, the little girl had fallen. Not hard, just the kind of tumble that came with wild feet and soft ground. The boys paused, worried, but then she sat up, grinned, and threw a handful of grass at them. Shaq chuckled. That grit. He recognized it. From his pocket he pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a single photo, a still frame from the security footage in Coldwater Motors. The moment Zion had looked up, afraid, then smiled at Shaq when he realized someone had seen him. Shaq turned the photo over. On the back he'd written just one line: use your silence, but never let it use you. He tucked the photo back inside, then slid the envelope into the glove compartment. It didn't need to be framed or broadcasted. It just needed to be remembered. Shaq started the engine. He wasn't going to knock on the door. The people living there now didn't owe him anything. And this wasn't about being recognized. It was about honoring what had built him. This house, that yard, those days spent watching his mother hold the world together with both hands. As he turned the truck around, the sun caught the windshield just right, casting a golden glow across the dashboard. It wasn't a spotlight. It was a reminder. Not every victory comes with a trophy. Some come with the quiet knowledge that you stood where others backed down, that you spoke when others swallowed their pride, that you walked into a place meant to break you, and you rebuilt it from the inside. Shaq eased the truck onto the road, the tires finding rhythm with the asphalt. The engine purred, steady and sure. He wasn't looking in the rearview mirror. The road ahead stretched wide. And this time, he wasn't just behind the wheel. He was guiding something forward, not just for himself, but for every voice that had once been silenced in a showroom, in a courtroom, on a roadside in Georgia. The story hadn't ended, but it had, finally, been heard. If this shook something in you, don't scroll past it. Carry it. Talk about it where silence has lived too long. Share it with someone who thinks injustice needs violence to be real. Because stories like this don't end. They echo when you let them.